I live on my own in a 2-bedroom house. I used to rent out the spare room to tenants on a long-term basis, but when I heard about Airbnb, I learned that I could maximize the profits by charging more money for a short stay. Sometimes I could earn in a long weekend what I would receive for charging a month's rent, so it seemed like a no-brainer. This meant I either had the place to myself for a good portion of the month, or I was receiving a higher income for the month. Either way, it was a win. This one night, I received a booking from a new Airbnb user called Ella. When I say new, I mean her profile didn't have any feedback or anything indicating she had used the platform before. She had booked for 2 nights, and this was fine with me. Airbnb was pretty established at this point, and I would always take photos before and after to save arguments of damage. Plus, I had cameras installed in all the communal areas to protect me from damage or theft. The room I rented out was an ensuite bedroom and included a microwave and kettle in the room, so there was no real reason to leave unless you were leaving the house. Ella arrived, and at first glance she seemed nice, nothing unusual. We made some small talk, and she said she was just visiting some friends for the weekend and needed somewhere to crash. I showed her around and carried her bag up to her room and handed her her key and left her there. I usually just stayed in my room when people were over. The living room was off limits to guests, but usually when guests hear the television, they take it upon themselves to come in and chat, whereas people seem to respect the privacy of a bedroom a little more. That night I heard Ella walking around the house. She didn't make a lot of noise or anything, but I could hear the creaking of the floorboards as she tiptoed down the hall and down the stairs. I soon fell asleep, as I had been working all week, and when I woke in the morning, everything seemed normal, nothing unusual about the house. I saw Ella leaving and wished her a good day. It was that night where things got really weird. I heard Ella come home and remember looking at the clock next to my bed. It was 1:15. As Ella came up the stairs and down the hall, I could hear 2 voices, Ella's and someone else's. I had explained the rules of no other guests in the house without asking me first, so I jumped out of bed to tell her there would be an additional charge for anyone else. I opened my bedroom door and there was Ella, standing on her own. I looked down the hall and there was no one there. Ella looked at me stunned as to why I had shot out of the bedroom door so fast. "I'm sorry, I thought I heard more than one voice," Ella replied. "It's okay, it happens all the time." I smiled and closed the door. What did she mean, it happens all the time? I thought this was an odd thing to say, and it kinda gave me chills. I was convinced she was talking to someone though, so I thought I would check the camera footage. The footage didn't record audio, as I thought that was a bit invasive, but as I watched the playback, Ella did appear to be talking to someone. She was smiling, laughing, and even looking to her side as if someone else was walking through the house with her, but as far as I could see, she was alone. Then I heard a loud thud, which sounded like it came from the hall, more specifically, outside my room. I felt a bit weirded out from watching that video of Ella walking through the house talking to someone, so I switched to the live feed. Ella's face was right in front of the hall camera. I shouted to her to ask if she was okay. She turned around and walked back into her bedroom without saying a word. I never saw her for the rest of the night. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night either. Sunday morning, I heard Ella's bedroom door close and heard her walking down the hallway, down the stairs, and then I heard the front door close. Most people thank you and say they had a nice time, but not Ella. She just left. Sunday night, still weirded out by the night before, I thought I would check out the cameras from Friday night too. Ella had been walking around the house for 3 hours in the middle of the night. But Ella didn't just walk around. She urinated in my kitchen sink, then went to the fridge and drank my orange juice straight out of the carton. Then she helped herself to my food, placing her hands in the likes of my cereal boxes and biscuits. She didn't even wash her hands after urinating in my sink. Then she walked just out of shot of the camera. I could see her arms moving, and then she walked over to the freezer, opened it, put her arm inside, then closed it. Did she just put something in my freezer? I went to the freezer to check it out, and this grown-ass woman had taken a shit in her hand while in my kitchen and put it in my freezer. I was absolutely in shock at what I just saw. I reported her to Airbnb and submitted the footage. I received some compensation, but this girl was a freak and not right in her head. I think she was banned from the platform after that, and since then, I've had no more weird encounters. Not yet, anyway.
Hey everyone, we truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel for more upcoming stories and exciting content.
For the past couple years, I've had the same job. I'm a janitor for a popular fast food restaurant. I don't take orders or anything at all aside from cleaning. I don't even see other workers a lot of the time because I'm scheduled overnight. At the restaurant, everything needs to be deep cleaned every day, and during open hours, it's basically impossible to do. I'd never had anything happen during my shifts, aside from the occasional customer knocking on the window asking if we're open. So on this night, I came in and got to work like I usually did. A couple other employees were still there when I got there, but by 10, which was an hour after closing, it was just me for the rest of the night. I popped in my headphones and started scraping the grills and prepping everything that needed to be hosed down. After a while, I lost track of time, but my best guess is that it was around 12 a.m. when I heard a knock at the front of the building. I pulled off my headphones, hearing it again. I walked to the front, expecting someone at the door, wanting to see if we were closed, but when I looked, nobody was there. I went up to the door and looked out at the parking lot. No cars or people. I knew I'd heard it from this side of the building though, so I waited for it again, but there was nothing. I ended up thinking I just mistook another sound for knocking, and I went back to work. Another hour or so went by, then I took a lunch break. I grabbed my lunch bag and sat at one of the tables in the middle of the dining area, taking my time since I was actually ahead on my cleaning. Once I finished eating, I went to the back and turned to grab the mop, only to see a man's face staring at me from outside the drive-thru window. He had messy hair and a blank face, but his eyes had something strange about them, like they were empty. I froze up for a second, and after a moment, the man calmly turned and walked away. My heart was racing in my chest, and I just stood in place, listening to his departing footsteps. I didn't know what to think. It was just incredibly creepy and strange. Once I got my confidence back, I opened the window and looked out to make sure he'd left. It was dark beyond the lights of the restaurant, but I didn't see anyone, so I closed it up and locked it. I was on edge for the next hour, constantly looking behind me at the windows, feeling like I was being watched. But as my shift was coming to an end, I started to feel some relief and the anxiety calmed down. One of the last few things I had to do was roll all the garbage bags out to the dumpster, which I was avoiding as long as I could. I checked the window before I stepped out, and it looked clear, so I quickly opened the door and got the garbage out. I started tossing them one by one into the dumpster, but not even 20 seconds in, the man appeared from around the corner. I stopped what I was doing and quickly asked what he needed. He didn't respond as he walked up to me and had that same empty stare. Now that I could see his whole body though, he was even more terrifying, being a fairly large man and wearing a dirty and stained coat. Not knowing what else to do, I ran for the door. I opened it as the man's footsteps rushed up behind me, and as I slammed the door shut, the man was able to stick his arm into the gap, preventing it from closing. I turned and sprinted to the other end of the restaurant, getting my keys out and unlocking the front door as fast as I could while hearing the man closing the distance on me. I barely got away again and ran before he got to me. I sprinted across the parking lot and as far as I could while calling the police. 5 minutes later, the police got to the restaurant. The man was gone. We got footage on the CCTVs, but no identity could be made of it. It also showed that as soon as I ran away, the man just stayed there and watched me for a bit, then left out the back door. What he wanted from me is unknown, but his creepy and objectively horrifying behavior gives me chills even to this day.
My roommate and I decided to have a short break away somewhere. We both had boyfriends who unofficially lived with us, so we decided to just have a girly weekend away. My roommate, Shiarn, convinced me to stay in this cute little cottage that was a little bit more expensive than I would like to have spent, but it did seem much nicer than staying in a motel, and it was much cheaper than a hotel. We booked it and 2 weeks later arrived for our holiday. The key was in the key safe, and there was a list of things we needed to know on the kitchen countertop, such as how to work the AC and hot water. The cottage was obviously looked after by someone who had OCD, as everything was laid out perfectly. It's hard to paint a picture, but imagine the finest cutlery, all laid out in order of size and purpose. All the jars and cans in the cupboard were in alphabetical order, with the label facing out. Although we laughed, it was a bit creepy, but I suppose first impressions are everything, and we were impressed, so I guess it worked. It was fair to say at that point that Shiarn had made the right choice in convincing me to go there. The first night, we decided to cook a meal together and opened a bottle of wine. We were joking and laughing, and quite unexpectedly, Shiarn asked me if I had ever thought about cheating on my boyfriend, and I told her honestly that I hadn't. Shiarn told me that she had often thought about it, and if ever the opportunity came up and the guy was cute, then she would probably give it a go. I was shocked by this, as Shiarn always seemed like the type to be faithful and loyal. The conversation and night moved on, and we went to bed around 11 p.m. as we had a full day planned the next day. The next day we went shopping and saw the sights of the city, and afterwards we decided to go to a few bars. We both had shopping bags with us, so we didn't intend for it to be a late one, or at least I didn't. As we were sitting there drinking, Shiarn pointed out two men who were glancing over at us.
"Let's get them over here,"
Shiarn whispered.
"We can just do a bit of harmless flirting. No one will know."
Before I could even object, Shiarn waved the two men over. They were both in their mid to late 30s, good-looking, nice suits, and appeared to be rather successful. We got to talking, and I have to admit, I actually enjoyed myself. I flirted a little, but when asked, I told them I had a boyfriend. One of the men asked Shiarn if she was single, and she said yes. Even though she had told me the night before that she would cheat if she got the chance, I never thought she would go through with it. I saw this as a red flag and asked the men to get us some drinks. They willingly obliged, and I took this opportunity to try and get my friend out of there. Shiarn refused to leave with me, saying she was having too much of a good time and didn't want the night to end. I picked up all the bags and grabbed her arm, but she was loud and obnoxious and started to cause a scene. One of the two men we were talking to came over and asked what was happening. I said it was time for us to leave, and Shiarn slurred out that she wasn't going anywhere. The man leaned in and whispered in my ear,
"If you want to go, then go, but your friend wants to stay, so she stays."
He said this quite assertively, and I didn't want to get dragged into whatever mess Shiarn was about to create for herself, so I called Shiarn's bluff and said I was going to get a cab and walked out. She didn't follow me. I went back to the Airbnb and waited up for Shiarn to come home, but as it got closer to midnight, there was still no sign of her. I texted her to make sure she was okay, and eventually I received a response. She said she was out having a good time and not to worry. I had had enough and decided to go to bed. She was a big girl, and I had tried everything I could to help her. I went to sleep and woke up sometime later. I had no idea what time it was, but I could hear Shiarn in the next room, and she wasn't alone. She was actually going through with this. I pulled my duvet over my head and went back to sleep, telling myself it's not my business. Soon after, even though I was sleeping, I felt a presence in the room with me. I remember opening my eyes and waiting for them to adjust. As I did, I saw the silhouette of a man sitting next to me on the bed. I screamed,
Hey, it's okay, it's me, the guy from the bar.
I screamed at him to get out, and he left the room calling me a crazy bitch on the way out. There was a small chest of drawers in the room, which I pushed behind the door to make sure he wouldn't get back in. That morning, I packed my things and left. I didn't even tell Shiarn that I was going. I had considered her one of my best friends, and she put me in a situation that made me really uncomfortable, and I wasn't sure at that point if I could forgive her. When I arrived home, my boyfriend was packing his things to leave. I asked him what he was doing, and he showed me a photo message he had received from Shiarn. It was a picture of me and the man in bed. We were both under the duvet, and he was laying behind me with his arm over me. As far as photos go, I looked guilty. I still to this day don't understand how he climbed into bed with me without waking me up. My boyfriend wouldn't even give me the opportunity to explain, let alone believe me. That day, my boyfriend moved out, and I haven't seen him since. I tried to talk to him, but he ghosted me. I tried to talk to Shiarn's boyfriend about what happened. He blamed me, saying just because I got caught out, that I shouldn't try and ruin their relationship. Shiarn and her boyfriend are still together, and I moved back in with my parents. I tried to do the right thing, and it all blew up in my face. I'm a relatively well-known gamer on YouTube and other social media platforms. I'm not super famous or anything, but I do have a decent following, and for this reason, I would like to keep my identity anonymous. I had been gaming for about 6 months when I received a message through Kik asking if I wanted to partake in a meet in a nearby city. Truth be told, I thought it was a scam from the get-go and asked for some more info, and a man who called himself Henry said that I wouldn't need to pay for anything and that he would be renting out an Airbnb for us all to stay and game in. It sounded too good to be true, and I said I wasn't interested. Henry said they were developing a new platform that had some investors, and it was all 100% funded and legit. They had all the connections to make it happen, and had been watching me for a while, and believed we could help each other out. As much as my mom and my friends mocked me for wanting to be a professional gamer, I would do anything to try and elevate my status and earn a living from gaming, and so I decided I was all in, despite how much it sounded like a scam. Henry then sent me the booking confirmation of a house he had rented through Airbnb. The receipt read $1,200 for a weekend. This was crazy, and it looked super cool. The fact it had been booked and paid for proved the legitimateness of the event. The rooms all had double beds and ensuite. There was a hot tub outside in the garden, and there was nothing for kilometers around us, so we could be as loud as we wanted. The only condition was I had to bring all my own gear for the setup. I knew this was going to be a hassle, but it seemed worth it. It was a 2-hour drive away from my house, and so I set off in plenty of time with all my gear loaded in the back of the car. I was hella excited. I arrived at the address given to me just as it was starting to turn dark. I noticed straight away that there were no other cars in the driveway. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I went up to the door and knocked. There was no answer, and there were no lights on inside, meaning I was the first one there. I was in the wrong place, or no one else was coming. I walked around the house looking for any signs of life, but I found no one. I checked the details Henry had sent me. I even checked the pictures on the Airbnb app, and I was definitely in the right place. I decided to wait it out, and after about 30 minutes, I heard a rustling coming from the bushes about 60 feet to my right. I wasn't sure if this was a wild animal or not, but I didn't want to take any chances, and so I jumped in my car and reversed so I could shine my headlights towards the bushes. As I did, I saw a shadowy figure, which looked like that of a man, run off into the trees. I was getting scared now. I had arrived a little early, but we were now 20 minutes past the official meeting time, and no one else had turned up. I messaged Henry to find out where he was. As soon as I sent it, I could see he had seen the message, but he never replied. I said to myself that I was going to give it another 10 minutes, and then I was going to leave. 10 minutes later, no one else had arrived, and I had had enough. I put my car into drive and left for home. I never mentioned that the Airbnb was up a long drive on a private road, and as I was driving down, I noticed a car parked with its lights off, set back amongst the trees. I never noticed it on the way up, and it would have been easier for me to see from the other side, and due to it still being daylight. Something wasn't right, and I was starting to feel more and more like this was a setup. Just as I was going to pull off the private road, I noticed a faint shadow of a car tailing me. It had to be the car I had passed in the trees, and it still didn't have its lights on. I put my foot on the gas and was out of there as quickly as possible. I eventually got to the highway, and I didn't see anyone following me, so I decided to ease up off the gas. I was shaking and anxious and felt like I needed to pull over, but just wanted to get myself home. I kept checking my mirrors, making sure nothing was following me, and eventually I arrived home close to 6 hours after I had left. I never heard from Henry again. I was talking to my friend about the whole ordeal a few days later, and he suggested contacting Airbnb about the booking. They told me it was canceled a few days before, and the person that rented it received a full refund. The weirdest thing was, I had spoken to Henry that day, and he asked me what gear I was bringing to make sure he had enough plugs and extension cords for everyone. I think they planned on stealing my gear when I was there, as they knew I had over $2,000 worth of equipment. Luckily, they weren't stealth sneaking up on me, and I was able to get away unharmed and with all my gear.
I work at a gas station in the center of my town. My shifts aren't always the same, but I find myself on overnights and early mornings most of the time. I'd been there for a whole year at this point, and honestly, I didn't have many negative things to say about it. It was just a normal mid-paying job that only required me to stand in one spot for 8 hours and talk to the occasional customers. On this day, I was working an overnight shift, the typical 10 to 6. Although it's usually not too busy overnight on the weekdays, it's worth mentioning that it was raining a decent amount this night, so I was expecting it to be a pretty quiet night. The first couple hours, I sat at a chair behind the register and just waited for anyone to come in. I got a few people that paid for gas with cash, but by 12:30 or 1ish, it was pretty much dead. No customers coming inside, and barely anyone even getting gas outside. Now, with absolutely no customers, I went around the counter and started fixing up the shelves a bit. They weren't too bad, but it was just a way to keep myself busy. As I was doing this, I had my back facing the windows, but I saw headlights glare through the store as someone pulled into the pumping stations. I didn't look because there was nothing interesting about it, just some guy pulling in to get gas. I kept on with tidying up the shelves for maybe 10 or so minutes before I unconsciously glanced out the window. The car was still there by one of the pumps, with a man standing right next to it, and as soon as I looked, the man shifted away, making it obvious that he was looking at me. After seeing that, I felt really weirded out, especially since they'd been there, supposedly pumping gas for a whole 10 minutes. I went back to the counter, then checked out the window again 30 seconds later, seeing the man getting in his car. The headlights flashed a few times, like he was trying and failing to turn it on, but he eventually got it running and drove away in a hurry. I stood there and just looked out the window for a minute, and something just really didn't seem right. I got an idea and pulled up the recent transactions for the pump he was at. The last time it was used was hours ago. He was there for 10 minutes with no reason at all other than watching me through the windows. I stayed behind the counter for a while, trying to just wait out the rest of my shift. A few more cars came and went, and then it got really quiet again for a while. And around 3 a.m., I heard something outside. The rain was heavy, but a rhythmic shuffling noise on the ground was barely audible through it. Footsteps right along the side of the building, moving toward the back. I tried to look out the window, but there was no good view. I did notice that no cars were in the parking lot or by the pumps though. I quickly left the counter and went to the back door, which was a heavy metal door that had no windows or anything on it. I pressed my ear against it and listened as the footsteps got louder and louder until they were right on the other side of the door. My eyes moved to the handle, waiting in the silence before the handle turned slowly and slightly, but getting caught by the lock. It went quiet again. Almost a whole minute passed. Then a man's voice grunted in frustration as a sudden sharp sound slid across the other side of the door. Footsteps followed soon after, leaving and going back to the side of the gas station. I ran back to the front, waiting to see them walking away, but didn't get any sight of them. Acting quickly, I picked up the store phone and dialed 911, hoping they could catch him before he got too far. I didn't know what was really happening, but someone trying to get in through the back door had to have intended something bad. When cops arrived, they didn't find the man, but what they did find was a car on the side of the road less than a quarter mile away. The same car I'd seen earlier with the man who was watching me. It had run out of gas and had mismatching license plates. Turned out to be some guy's missing car from 2 states over. The other thing they found was a long scrape across the back door, made by a sharp metal object, likely a knife. Knowing all these details, I think I actually got extremely lucky, as the man was probably on the run already and could have been planning anything.